Like little suns, he added with a grin, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. Grayson forced a smile, his chest tightening as he glanced at Emma. Her hands were white-knuckled around her fork, her jaw clenched so tightly it seemed like she might shatter the utensil in her grip. "They do look amazing," Grayson murmured, his voice barely audible over the clinking of cutlery. He wanted to say more, ask about mornings where pancakes shaped like suns became a tradition, or how many birthdays and holidays he'd missed, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he focused on Liam, whose energy filled the room like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Emma finally spoke, though her tone was clipped and distant. "Liam exaggerates. They're just pancakes." She offered him a fleeting glance before returning her attention to her plate. Her movements deliberate and mechanical, as if willing herself not to break down. Grayson swallowed hard, the lump in his throat refusing to budge. In these turbulent and uncertain times, the Virgin Mary is delivering an urgent message to the faithful, one that resonates deeply with the challenges we are witnessing around the world today. Her call is not just a warning, but also an invitation to strengthen our faith, deepen our spirituality, and prepare for the significant trials that lie ahead. Her message is a powerful reminder that both physical and spiritual readiness are essential. As the world faces an unprecedented array of challenges, the Virgin Mary urges us to stay vigilant, to resist the distractions that so easily pull us away from the things that truly matter. With the world in turmoil, facing illness, wars, natural disasters, and societal unrest, she warns us of events that will test our very faith and resilience. One of these trials will be a mysterious illness that could spread across the globe, bringing immense suffering and pain. But this message is not just about doom and gloom. It is one of hope, urging us to reel. If I'd known about him. Her head snapped up, eyes blazing with fury. "If you'd known?" she repeated incredulously. "What difference would it have made, Grayson? You disappeared without a trace. No calls, no letters, nothing. Do you really expect me to believe you would have stuck around?" He flinched, her words hitting their mark with brutal precision. "No," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm here now, and I want to make things right. For Liam, for you, for all of us." Emma laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "It's not that simple. You can't just waltz back into our lives and fix 7 years of absence with apologies and promises." "I know," he said quickly, desperation creeping into his tone. "I'm not asking for anything except a chance, to prove I've changed, to be part of his life. Whatever you need from me, I'll do it." She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she exhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair. "This isn't about what?" 7 years. 7 long years since he'd last seen those eyes. That face framed by cascading waves of dark hair that fell just past her shoulders. Time had softened some edges, but sharpened others, leaving her expression more guarded, more distant. Neither of them moved for a moment. Grayson's mind screamed at him to get out of the car, to explain, to apologize, to do something, anything other than sit there, paralyzed, with his heart lodged in his throat and his past staring him down. But his legs wouldn't obey. Guilt and disbelief rooted him to the spot, cementing him in place. Finally, Emma blinked, breaking the spell. She took a step back, her expression shifting from shock to something colder, harder. Her lips pressed into a thin line as the door began to close, slowly, deliberately, as if giving him one final chance to make a choice. Grayson inhaled sharply, forcing himself to move. His legs felt wooden, knees unsteady as he stumbled out of the car. The door clicked shut just before. "I don't want to do this here," she muttered finally, her voice barely audible. Not in front of him. She hesitated, then stepped back, opening the door wider with a stiff nod. "You might as well come in." Grayson hesitated for a heartbeat, half expecting her to slam the door in his face again. Then, cautiously, he stepped inside. The warmth enveloped him immediately, wrapping around him like a blanket. The faint scent of vanilla and something freshly baked filled the air. It felt like a punch to the gut. Liam reappeared in the hallway, beaming. "You're staying," he declared, clapping his hands in delight. Grayson's heart squeezed painfully at the sight. He tried for a smile, but it faltered. Only if your mum says it's okay," he managed. Emma's lips pressed into an even thinner line, but she didn't contradict him, oblivious to the tension. Like stars, Grayson's lips twitched despite himself. "She always did," he murmured softly. The memory of lazy Sunday mornings and batter-smudged kisses surfacing unbidden. Emma's fork stilled, her fingers curling tight around the handle. She didn't look up, but Grayson saw the tremor in her hand, the slight catch in her breath. Liam's eyes darted between them, confused by the sudden silence. "Mom, can he stay for pancakes?" he asked, wide-eyed and hopeful. "Please?" Emma's eyes shut briefly, the sigh slipping out before she could stop it. "It's late," she said tightly. "I think it's time." For bed. Liam's face fell, but he didn't argue, sliding off his chair with a pout. "But you'll come back, right?" he asked, Grayson's small fingers curling into the fabric of Grayson's sleeve. The sheer force of that tiny hand nearly broke him. Grayson's voice cracked. If your mum says it's okay," he managed. Emma's shoulders stiffened further, but she didn't say no, didn't say anything at all, just turned away sharply, arms wrapping around herself. The room was quiet, the kind of stillness that comes just before bedtime. Liam's eyes darted between them, his small face clouded with unease. "But I wanted to show him my room, needed to." He protested softly, lips puckering into a tiny pout. "Can he stay for a little bit?" he pleaded, looking up at Emma with wide, hopeful eyes. Emma hesitated, her resolve wavering like a candle in the wind. Her gaze flickered toward Grayson, guarded and heavy with unspoken warnings. The air seemed to crackle with tension, every breath hanging on a fragile thread stretched taut between old wounds and the trembling uncertainty of second chances. "If your mum says it's okay," Grayson said finally, his voice thick and uneven, as though each word cost him dearly. Emma's shoulders sagged, defeat etched into every line of her body. She exhaled sharply, looking away, her jaw tight. "Just for a little bit," she relented, her tone reluctant but not unkind. Then, softer, almost under her breath, "Ye still here?" The days blurred together, a mix of strained conversations, awkward silences, and Liam's unwavering enthusiasm. Each visit pulled Grayson forward, anchoring him to something he hadn't realized he'd been missing. He found excuses to stop by more often, dropping off groceries Emma hadn't asked for, fixing a leaky faucet she insisted was fine, lingering on the porch longer than necessary in the faint hope she might invite him in. But Emma remained distant, her eyes shadowed with caution and something heavier, something Grayson couldn't name. Her responses were clipped, her movements deliberate, her shoulders stiff whenever he drew too close. Yet Liam's joy never wavered. Every visit was met with an eager smile, small hands grabbing at his sleeves, a dozen stories spilling from him at once. It was too easy to lose himself in those moments, to pretend for just a little while that this life could belong to him if he reached far enough, fought hard enough. But his own home grew colder with Ask, explain. Ready for bed, okay? Liam's gaze darted between Emma and Grayson, his small face etched with unease. But then he piped up, lips jutting into a tiny pout. "But I wanted to show him my room. Can he stay for a little bit, please?" Emma's resolve wavered visibly. Her eyes slid toward Grayson, guarded and wary, 1,000 unspoken warnings layered beneath the hesitation. For a breathless moment, everything hung suspended on a fragile thread, stretched taut between past hurts and the trembling uncertainty of second chances. If your mum says it's okay," Grayson managed, his voice thick and unsteady. Emma's shoulders sagged as a weary sigh escaped her lips. She looked away, jaw tight, before relenting. "Just for a little bit," she said finally, the words grudging but without venom. "You still have school in the morning," she added pointedly, though Liam was already bouncing with excitement. "Okay, come on, it's this way," he exclaimed, grabbing Grayson's. It was too easy to lose himself in those moments, to pretend, just for a little while, that this life could belong to him if he reached far enough, fought hard enough. Grayson's own home felt colder with each night he returned to it. The empty expanse of his penthouse, the silence that used to be a comfort, now pressed down on him, suffocating. He lingered by the window more often, city lights glittering below, but offering no warmth. The loneliness was a dull ache, but nothing compared to the raw pain that ripped through him the morning he pulled up to Emma's house to find a car already parked outside. A blue sedan, modest but well kept, with bumper stickers peeling at the edges. Grayson's hands clenched on the steering wheel, his pulse a rapid thrum in his ears. His jaw tightened as the front door opened and a man stepped out, tall, fair-haired, with a soft smile and an easy laugh that made Liam's eyes light up. Emma followed, holding the door open, her posture relaxed in a way Grayson. What the logistics, the planning, setting things up, making sure it runs smoothly. I can handle that. His voice wavered slightly, betraying the nerves he was trying so hard to mask. Emma stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, She sighed, running a hand through her hair. Look, Grayson, I don't know if this is a good idea. You showing up here, offering to help. It feels like you're stepping into something you don't fully understand. I do understand, he said quickly, leaning forward as though sheer urgency could convince her. I get it, okay? I messed up. I wasn't there when I should have been, for you, for Liam. But I'm here now, and I want to make things right. Even if it's just helping with a stupid fundraiser. The word stupid hung awkwardly in the air, but Emma didn't call him out on it. Instead, she crossed her arms, studying him with an intensity that made his chest tighten. This isn't about proving yourself or fixing everything overnight. At first, Emma kept her distance, watching him warily as though waiting for him to falter. But as the days passed and Grayson continued to show up, reliable, focused, and genuinely invested, her guard began to lower ever so slightly. One evening, as they worked side by side in Emma's living room, surrounded by boxes of decorations and half-empty coffee cups, Liam bounded in, holding a flyer he'd decorated himself. "Mom, look what I made!" Emma smiled, taking the colourful paper from him. "Wow, buddy, this is amazing! Did you draw all these balloons?" Liam beamed, nodding enthusiastically. "And Dad helped me write the words." Grayson froze, his pen hovering mid-air. The room seemed to shrink around him, the weight of Liam's innocent declaration pressing down on his chest. Emma glanced at him, her smile faltering for just a second before she recovered. "That's great, sweetheart. Your dad's really good at helping, huh?" "Yeah," Liam chirped, oblivious to the tension crackling between the adults. "Here you go, champ. Nice shot." "Thanks," Liam exclaimed, hugging the bear tightly. Then, without missing a beat, he added, "You're pretty cool, you know that?" Grayson blinked, caught off guard by the simple sincerity of the comment. Before he could respond, Emma approached, her expression cautious but not unwelcoming. "Everything okay here?" "Perfect," Daniel replied, clapping Grayson on the shoulder. "Couldn't have done it without him." Emma raised an eyebrow, glancing between the two men. "Well, miracles do happen." Her tone was teasing, but there was a flicker of something softer in her eyes, a hint of acknowledgement, perhaps even gratitude. Grayson met her gaze briefly, allowing himself a small, tentative smile. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light over the festivities, Grayson stood back, observing the scene before him. Liam laughed as he chased after bubbles. Emma watched with a quiet smile, and Daniel, "But you know, decorations, logistics, budget management, I could handle that." Emma stared at him, arms crossed defensively, a dozen sharp retorts flickering behind her eyes. Grayson held his breath, heart stuttering in terror. What if she says no? After what felt like an eternity, her shoulders sagged, and she let out a tired sigh. "Fine," she muttered, her voice grudging but firm. "But if you make things more complicated, I swear." "I won't," Grayson interrupted quickly. Relief flooding through him like a dam breaking. "Promise." She rolled her eyes, though a faint smile tugged at the corners of her mouth, gone too quickly to be sure. But it was enough for Grayson's heart to soar. The next few days passed in a blur of late nights, spreadsheets, and glitter, so much glitter. Grayson arrived early and stayed late, fetching coffee, arranging tables, and stringing up lights with clumsy fingers and awkward smiles. At first, Emma kept her distance, issuing clipped instructions and avoiding. The Virgin Mary's message, delivered through the seer Luz de Maria on August 23, 2025, rings with urgency and divine compassion as she warns of the impending trials that will test humanity's resolve. In this profound prophetic revelation, Mary calls us to spiritual and physical preparedness as the world faces unprecedented calamities. Her message, while sobering, is also one of hope and salvation, reminding us that through faith and readiness, we can navigate the storm that is coming. Mary's vision of the future is not just about natural disasters and plagues, though these will be severe and widespread. She speaks of viruses and illnesses that will spread rapidly, leaving devastation in their wake. These are not just ordinary afflictions, they are divine purifications, intended to cleanse the world of sin and bring people back to God. Yet, rather than viewing these challenges as punishment, Mary urges us to see them as opportunities to renew our faith, seek forgiveness, and return to D. Whatever awaited him at Emma's house, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't giving up without a fight. Ask, explain. Grayson held his breath, his heart stuttering in his chest as he waited for Emma's response. The words had barely left his lips. I'll handle decorations, logistics, budget management. I can do that. And now it felt like the entire world hung suspended on her reply. Emma stood there, arms crossed defensively, a dozen sharp retorts flickering behind her eyes. For what felt like an eternity, she simply stared at him, her expression unreadable. Finally, her shoulders sagged, and she let out a tired sigh. Fine, she muttered, her voice grudging but resigned. Then, with a pointed glare, she added, but if you make things more complicated, I swear. I won't, Grayson interrupted quickly, relief flooding through him so intensely it almost made him dizzy. He promised before she could finish the threat, his sincerity spilling over. Emma rolled her eyes. There. Don't start. I'm sorry, he rushed out, hands lifting in a placating gesture. I needed to say it. I shouldn't have left, Emma. I know that. I knew it then, and I was a coward. I thought if I just worked hard enough, built something big enough, it would make it okay. That maybe it would be worth it. Her voice was cold, but her eyes glistened, fingers white-knuckled around her own arms. Was it? She asked quietly. Was it worth it? Grayson's laugh was hollow, broken. No, he choked out. God, no. Leaving you was the biggest mistake I ever made. Emma's eyes squeezed shut, her jaw tightening. Don't do this, she whispered, her voice cracking. Don't come back now, after all these years, and pretend. She trailed off, unable to finish. I never stopped loving you, Grayson blurted, the words raw and desperate. Not for a single day. Her breath hitched, eyes flying open wide and startled. For a heartbeat, the anger melted, leaving only pain, aching and unguarded. Grayson's. Of course, he breathed, words tumbling out too quickly, too desperate. I'll be right there. The drive was a blur of red lights and drumming fingers on the steering wheel. The knot in his stomach tightened with every mile. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not yet. Ask, explain throat tightened with every mile, each streetlight casting fleeting shadows across his clenched jaw. He parked haphazardly in front of Emma's house. The familiar sight of the porch light flickering like a beacon pulling him forward, despite the storm raging inside him. For a moment, he sat there, gripping the wheel, trying to steady his breathing. This wasn't about him. It was about Liam, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. It was about proving to Emma, even just a little, that he could be better, that he wanted to be better. The door opened before he could knock, and there she stood, arms crossed tightly over her chest, hair pulled back into a messy bun. Exhaustion. Let us embrace our role as warriors of light, guided by the Rosary, protected by Archangel Michael, and empowered by God's infinite mercy. Thank you for joining us today. As we face the trials ahead, may we walk together in faith, prayer, and unity, knowing that God is with us in every step we take. May His protection and the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary guide us, comfort us, and strengthen us as we face the days ahead. Saint Michael, the mighty Archangel, stands as a protector and warrior, ever ready to defend those who call upon him from the forces of darkness and evil. With his sword of light, he slices through the chains of fear, doubt, and despair that often grip our hearts, offering a pathway to freedom and peace. In times of distress, the Virgin Mary encourages us to turn to him, assuring us that we are never alone in our struggles. Through God's grace and Michael's powerful intercession, the faithful are empowered to stand strong against the challenges that threaten. The miles had weighed on him, each one pressing harder against his chest until it felt like a vice. Pulling up to the modest house, Grayson's headlights cast pale beams onto the porch, illuminating its weathered boards. He barely had time to knock before the door swung open, and Liam launched himself into Grayson's legs with an uncontainable laugh. Small arms wrapped around him tightly. "You're here!" Liam crowed, beaming up at him as though Grayson were some long-lost hero returned from battle. "I thought you weren't gonna come." Grayson's heart clenched painfully in his chest. Sinking to one knee, he pulled Liam into a tight embrace, his voice cracking under the weight of emotion. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, buddy," he whispered, throat thick with unshed tears. Emma stood in the hallway, arms crossed, her wary gaze softening just slightly compared to their last encounter. The silence between them hung heavy, suffocating, but she didn't tell him to leave, and that alone was some. Until the next board meeting, the next acquisition, until you get bored and decide we're not worth the trouble again. Grayson's breath caught, guilt twisting deep and raw. "Emma," he startled, his voice cracking. "I know I don't deserve a second chance. I know that. But I want to try. I want to make things right." Her eyes squeezed shut, a tear slipping free before she could swipe it away, frustrated and trembling. "It's not that simple," she choked out. "You left. You can't just come back 7 years later and expect—" "I never stopped loving you," he blurted, his voice raw and desperate. "Not for a single day. I was a coward and I was wrong, and I am so sorry, Emma." Her breath hitched painfully, shoulders shaking with the effort to hold herself together. Grayson took a cautious step forward, hands trembling at his sides. "Please," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Please let me try. I'll spend every day proving it. If you give me one more chance." Her eyes snapped, the smallest flicker of hope threaded through the cracks. As the night settled softly around them, Grayson knew the road ahead would be long and uncertain. But for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe, truly believe, that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. Ask. The miles had passed in a blur, each one pressing heavier on Grayson's chest, until it felt like the weight of the world was sitting squarely on his lungs. When he finally pulled up to the modest house, the headlights cast pale beams across the porch, illuminating the familiar steps that led to a door he hadn't dared approach in years. He barely had time to knock before it swung open, and Liam barreled into him with an uncontainable laugh, small arms wrapping tightly around his legs. "You're here," Liam crowed, beaming up at him with a gap-toothed grin. "I thought you weren't gonna come." Grayson's throat tightened painfully as he sank to one knee, pulling. So how can we prepare for the days ahead? The Virgin Mary has always urged the faithful to be spiritually ready, and now, more than ever, we must heed her call. The Rosary is a powerful tool of protection and prayer. As Mary has said, the Rosary is a shield against evil, a spiritual weapon that can protect us from the approaching darkness. Turning to prayer, particularly the Rosary, will help us fortify our hearts and minds, allowing us to face any challenge with the strength of faith. Additionally, the Virgin Mary calls on us to support each other in these difficult times. We are not meant to face the storm alone. Now is the time to build communities of faith and prayer, to form a united front against the trials ahead. In our prayers, we are not just seeking protection for ourselves. We are interceding for the entire world. Through our acts of love, charity, and faith, we can spread light in the darkest of times. The Virgin Mary's message is one of profound urgency and compassion. Then, we can spread light in the darkest of times. The Virgin Mary has always urged the faithful to be spiritually ready, and now, more than ever, we must heed her call. Now is the time to build communities of faith and prayer, to form a united front against the trial. En el estoicismo, la adversidad no es una simple molestia, sino una parte esencial del currículo de la vida. Pensadores como Séneca y Epicteto argumentan que las dificultades no son obstáculos para nuestra felicidad, sino las oportunidades que necesitamos para practicar la resiliencia, el coraje y la templanza. Séneca dijo célebremente: "El oro se prueba con el fuego y el carácter humano en el horno de la humillación". Es en la adversidad donde se construye la verdadera fuerza moral y emocional. Los estoicos creen que experimentar y superar la adversidad es vital para moldear un alma bien templada. La adversidad nos empuja más allá de nuestros límites, nos confronta con nuestras debilidades y nos invita a abrazar nuestro potencial. Esto es crucial para cualquier desarrollo personal. El estoicismo nos anima a ver los desafíos no como algo contra lo que resistir, sino como un entrenamiento filosófico. Cada dificultad es una lección disfrazada, enseñándonos sobre la impermanencia. Let himself believe just for a moment that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end. Breeson kept his promise. He stepped back from the day-to-day grind, handed off projects to his executives, and set his phone to do not disturb more times in a week than he had in the past 7 years combined. His calendar, once packed with board meetings and flights to 3 different cities in the same day, now held scribbled reminders of school pickups, Liam's soccer practices, and Saturday afternoons, blocked out simply with the word family. The decision wasn't easy. There were arguments. Board members outraged, investors spitting fire and threats of lawsuits. But Grayson had stood firm, voice steady and unyielding. For the first time in years, he didn't waver. The fight trained him, but not as much as the silence that came after, when the calls stopped and the emails slowed, leaving only the quiet realization of how much time he'd wasted chasing a life that now seemed empty. But the moment Liam barreled into his arms outside, Grayson's eyes burned as a sob clawed its way past the lump in his throat. "I hate how much I miss you," he rasped, his voice fraying like an old rope stretched too thin. "God, Emma, I'm so sorry." They stayed like that for what felt like hours, tangled and trembling, clinging to each other with every ounce of pain, regret, and fragile hope that had built up over 7 long years. The wind rustled softly through the willow branches above them, sunlight filtering warm and golden through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground. When Emma finally pulled back, her eyes were red-rimmed but soft, her fingers still curled tightly into his shirt, not quite letting go. Grayson's breath hitched, his heart pounding with a flicker of fragile hope. "I don't know if it's enough," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can just forget." "You don't have to," Grayson promised, his voice fierce and raw. "I don't know if it's enough," she whispered. "I don't know if it's enough," she whispered. "I don't know if it's enough," she whispered. "I don't know if it's enough." Grayson's eyes burned as a sob clawed its way past the lump in his throat, casting dappled shadows on the ground. When Emma finally pulled back, her eyes were red-rimmed but soft, her fingers still curled tightly into his shirt, not quite letting go. Grayson's breath hitched, his heart pounding with a flicker of "we'll start over." Liam's giggles rang out from the backyard, and Emma's eyes crinkled at the corners, soft and unguarded. It was slow, hesitant, each smile a small victory, but it was progress. It was everything. And then, before he'd even realized it, a year had passed. Grayson stood in the backyard of Emma's modest house, his fingers clumsy with nerves as he arranged the fairy lights one last time. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Liam's excited giggles echoed from the kitchen window, muffled but unmistakable. His heart pounded, palms damp despite the cool evening air. He smoothed his hands down the front of his shirt, breathing deeply, trying to force the nerves to settle. He'd faced down boardrooms full of investors, furious lawyers, reporters with questions that cut to the bone, but nothing had ever terrified him quite like this. The screen door creaked open, and Grayson's breath caught as Emma stepped outside. Her eyes widened, lips parting in soft surprise. The year passed in slow, careful steps. 3 months after that day in the park, Grayson resigned from his position at Co., hands shaking only slightly as he signed the papers and watched his life's work pass into someone else's hands. The board was furious, investors even more so. But Grayson held firm, his voice steady despite the frantic rhythm of his heart pounding against his ribs. For the first time in years, he felt lighter. Uncertain, yes, but unburdened. It was the kind of lightness that came from shedding something heavy, something that had worn him down to brittle edges and frayed seams. Emma had been cautious when he told her, her eyes narrowing with skepticism. You really quit?" she breathed, her voice small and stunned. "I did," Grayson replied, forcing a smile that trembled at the corners. "I wanted to be here, really be here, if you'll still have me." Emma's eyes glistened, her mouth trembling. She didn't answer right away, but she let him pull her into his arms. Lee. His heart thundered, hands trembling, but he forced the words out, his voice cracking but earnest. "I know I can't undo what I did," he began, his voice raw and stumbling. "I know I can't make up for 7 years of mistakes with a few months of trying to do better. But I love you. I never stopped, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that, if you'll let me." Emma's eyes glistened, her breath hitching audibly, fingers white-knuckled around her sleeves. Grayson took a shaky breath, dropping to one knee. The ring box trembled between his fingers. Emma's hands flew to her mouth, a choked sound escaping as her eyes went wide, tear-bright. "I want to come home," Grayson whispered, his voice breaking. "To you and Liam. I want to make things right. So, will you marry me?" For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Ask, explain. The world seemed to hold its breath, suspended in a fragile silence. Grayson's chest ached with the weight of it all. His lungs burned. His hands trembled so violently that he nearly dropped the ring. And then Anna's breath escaped her in a shattered sob, her hands flying to cover her mouth as tears spilled freely down her cheeks. Her head dipped, and a small, breathless laugh slipped past her lips. She nodded, her shoulders shaking with the force of it. "Yes," she choked out, her voice cracking like fragile glass. "God, yes." Air rushed back into Grayson's lungs in a broken sob, his eyes stinging as he surged to his feet. His arms wrapped around her tightly, the ring box slipping from his grasp and forgotten on the grass. Emma's hands clutched at him desperately, fingers tangling in his hair, her face buried in his shoulder as tears dampened his shirt. From somewhere nearby, Liam's delighted squeal pierced the air, tiny feet pounding across the porch. "You're getting married!" he crow. He crow. He crow. He crow. He crow.